We started last week looking at this idea of Jesus and the Ten Commandments. And we started to address, after looking at the background information, the idea that we're going to get into the Christian approach to life's problems. And one of the things that I think as Christians that we can do better at, especially from our pulpits, is addressing the fact that Christianity is not this philosophy or theoretical philosophy, as we've been looking at on Wednesday nights from the book of 1 John, but rather is a realistic, a real practicality. And so Christianity does not exist in this bubble. Sometimes you see it presented that way. Christian parents sometimes can be accused or seen as, perceived as, and sometimes it's likely true, is sheltering their children and not wanting them to be involved or aware of what goes on in the outside world. And there's probably a happy balance there. I maybe go too far the other direction, but it's my personal belief that we live in a world with all kinds of things going on around us. And you cannot avoid that for your entire life. One of the most prominent examples in my mind is that my children have always went to funerals with us and to viewings with us. I talk to people. I'm not critical if you have or do shelter or keep your children from those situations, but that's part of life. It's a reality. Quite frankly, it wasn't that long ago that it would have been normal for children to see people dead in the street. It was much more in your face than where it is today. And my only point in saying all of that is to say that life is ugly. Life is dirty. Life is full of all kinds of things that we'd rather it not be. And that is the story of the gospel. That is the story of Jesus, that he did not remain in heaven, but rather he came down to earth. He lived amongst the filth and the dirt and the problems and gave us the good news that's meant to be right here on earth. So we're looking at this idea of the Christian's approach to life's problems. And we're connecting and looking at, rather, the connection between the Ten Commandments and Jesus. And so in doing that, we'll look at our relationship to God, which we'll get to next week, Lord willing, and then our relationship to our fellow man, and then the fulfillment of the law. But we mentioned this problem last week in sorting through these things, that there are two extremes that are very easy to go to. Number one is that we acknowledge the Ten Commandments, which is part of the old law, and say, well, that's binding for us today. We noted the problems that immediately we run into with that. Right? If we're going to keep part of the law, we have to keep all of the law. And then the other extreme that is easy to fall into is this idea that the old law was abolished, that it has no part, it's not binding on us today. And in fact, we can even take that to the point to say we serve a different kind of God today. That the Old Testament law demanded a sinner to be stoned, and the New Testament, God is a God of love and grace and forgiveness. And doesn't take much thought to see the problems that we run into in that direction too. Is it a different God of the Old Testament? Does he have a different will or a different personality of the New Testament? Well, as we look today at Exodus 34, 1 through 8, and again Matthew 5, 17 through 20, we're going to see a connection between these two. And at its premise, the Ten Commandments are so important to us because religion, or Christianity in particular, is about a relationship with God. Now, that's easy to forget because relationships take a lot, an awful lot of what? Effort, work. Yeah, those are the exact kind of ideas that I've skipped. Relationships take a lot, right? Now, what does marriage take? Patience. Say that again?
Extra lot.
An extra lot of patience. Yes, yes. But really, when we talk like this, we're talking about the relationship, aren't we? All a marriage takes is to not divorce. Right? That's all it requires. How many of you are satisfied with that? No one. And for me, that's beautifully illustrated. Wait, Jesus uses that exact illustration, doesn't he? Throughout all of Scripture. It's more than the law. It's about a relationship with God. And that takes a lot of work. So it's easy to kind of narrow our view down and say, well, I have to do A, B, C, and D. And then all's good. Right? But relationship is a lot more work. And the Old Testament law gives us that moral foundation of which Jesus does not come to abolish and do away with, but rather to fulfill, to propel, to erect a spiritual monument that's even greater than that Old Testament law. Because in Matthew 5, beyond the passages we're going to get to, he's dealing with that very idea. He doesn't say, well, the Old Testament law said adultery's wrong, now it's fine. He says the Old Testament law says adultery's wrong. Now I'm going to take the spiritual intent of that commandment and say what every wife and husband would say in a relationship: I don't want you to lust. Right? He builds on that structure. That's why the Old Testament law is so important to understand and to have an appreciation for. Questions or comments? Let's look at these two passages then. Exodus 34, 1 through 8. I'll read this passage and then we'll come back to it in part. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut for yourselves 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready by morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in the hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with them there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. Verse 6, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sins, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and to the 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head towards the earth and worshipped. By the way, verse 7, if you take special note of that, we're dealing with a topic tonight in the lesson that deals directly with that idea. Now, as I read that, I remembered there's one more important concept that I forgot to bring up in our introduction. And that is that 2 passages that I have given you, Exodus 34 and Matthew 5. What is going on in each of those passages? What is the similarity between the 2? Let's take the really easy one. What's going on in Exodus 34?
He's telling Moses to go back up and rebuild them, or take the tablets up so he could rewrite them since he broke them.
Okay?
And nobody was to go with him, or the animals, or nothing.
Okay? So, absolutely, Bob, you're correct. And you've honed right down in there into a micro view of exactly what's going on, which is perfect. Moses is going back up the mountain. Why is he going on a mountain? And Bob mentions the tablets. What's going on with all this if we pan out a little bit? It's given the law, right? We talked about what that law was a little bit last week. But it's a theocracy, right? The civil and religious law are one and the same at this point. God is creating a nation. He's giving the law by which his people, the covenant, by which his people are going to live by. Right? What's going on in Matthew 5? And not just Matthew 5, but 5, 6, and 7. What's that called, those 3 verses? Sermon on the Mount. We'll talk about that similarity in a moment, because Moses was where? Mount Sinai. Where was Jesus? Don't give me a specific name of a mountain. He was on the mountain, right? We'll talk about why that is in just a moment. What is going on in Matthew 5, or the Sermon on the Mount? Come to fulfill the law is part of what he's saying, absolutely. Again, that's a very micro or very specific of what we're looking at. What's the macro or the panned out version of what's going on in Matthew 5?
He says, "Come and blessed are they that are poor in spirit, and blessed are they that mourn,
Okay, so I'm gonna augment what you're saying a little bit, Bob. So what's Jesus talking about during those Beatitudes? Blessings of what? Everything you have? Could we say the kingdom?
Yeah.
He's talking about the kingdom, isn't he? Mm-hmm. Like, are we starting to see a similarity? At Mount Sinai, God is laying down the law of the Jewish nation, right? What's Jesus talking about, Matthew 5? The new law of the new covenant. Right? He's giving his gospel. And all those Beatitudes in the beginning of Matthew 5 are about the kingdom, about the new people. So here is what's really significant, I think, for us putting the Old Testament and the New Testament together, understanding what God's purpose and will for each of them is. Moses was the lawgiver. He laid down the commandments, the laws of what we call the Old Testament. I think I've shared with you a number of times. I was once having a conversation with a Jewish client of mine, and she said, "How do you know all that?" And I said, I study the Old Testament. She looked at me and she said, "You mean the only Testament?" I didn't realize our terminology reflects a lot about us, right? But Moses is giving the law of the Jewish nation that time. Jesus is doing the same thing. He's giving the law, the creed of the new kingdom. Now, I hope I give more answers than questions in bringing this up. But if you look closely, and there's critics of the Bible, they'll point this out. The Sermon on the Mount, according to Matthew, takes place, as the name would imply, in the mountain. Luke tells the story a bit different. Jesus is in a plain. You say, uh-oh. There's a problem there. Well, I don't believe there is. Do you think Jesus gave the same sermon only one time or more than once? He's talking about the start of the kingdom. He's talking to different people. He probably gave this same lesson and certainly the same concepts over and over and over again. Matthew and Luke are bringing out two very different pictures of Jesus, both of which are important and helpful to us. We're focusing on Matthew. Moses was up in the mount. You look at the whole scheme of the writer of Matthew, and he's bringing out the fact that the Jewish nation should be listening to him because God's covenant is changing. Instead, they're rejecting him. So we have Jesus in the mount, just as Moses was in the mount, speaking on behalf of God, his will for the people. Questions or comments? For me, that helps to understand the connection between the two. Jesus is speaking for God. He's not going to change the concept and the basis of the Old Testament to something different. He's augmenting it. He's building upon it. All right, so verses 1 and 2. Bob pointed out what took place. In those verses, Moses is told, cut a new set of tablets. Why? He broke them. Oh, what parent here doesn't know what that's like? We all know what that's right? Kevin walked in this morning and he said, someone in Burgundy Suburban just backed over your motorcycle. Is that okay? I'm really counting on the fact he was joking, so I said, yeah, that's fine. But why is he joking? Because that's possible, right? Stuff like that happens in life, especially when kids are around. Here's what's amazing to me, and here's what's really encouraging, and this gets back to the introduction about the muddy, dirty world that we live in, and Christianity being for that world. The Bible doesn't withhold the mistakes and the shortcomings of the people God uses, because he used people. David was a seducer. People say, but he says he's a man after God's own heart. He was a person. He had serious faults. Moses breaks the tablets. I call you the whole way up here. I come down from heaven. I write these for you. And because you get mad, you throw them down and break them. Here, I think, is the underlying message of the Old Testament, because sometimes we fail to see it. We think God in the Old Testament is just this judgmental, strike them dead type of God. The tablets can be remade. The law that was broken can be mended together. It's part of the Old Testament law. In fact, the very story of the people standing at the base of Mount Sinai, of no effort, of no, the word I'm looking for, value of their own, God chose them and delivered them out of Egypt. His underlying basis. That's the God we love. That's the God we serve. He's the same God of the Old Testament and the New. Questions or comments? So verses 3 and 5 then, we see God descending into heaven in what? What's he in? The cloud. Yeah. He's descending in a cloud. Isn't it interesting that the passage of which God is conveying himself, revealing himself, he's in a cloud? Why? Why is he in a cloud? No one can see God and live? Absolutely. What's that statement really getting at? Does it have a deeper meaning than I'll physically die if I look at the face of God? Moses just saw his backside. Now he's shining. Right? Is part of the message not that I cannot fully comprehend God? And his power, those two things are very closely connected, aren't they? You know, we talked about the high priest going into the Holy of Holies once a year. Before he did it, they filled the whole place with incense for the very same reason. While God is coming to earth, while God's revealing himself, the message is still loud and clear. He's beyond us. And isn't that what makes him worth serving? I mean, I oftentimes said if I can fully understand God, he's certainly not worth you worshiping. If this mind can wrap around everything pertaining to him. So he descends in the cloud. I think one of the beautiful things for me about that is there's always more there to learn. Right? I'm not sure you can be a student of Scripture and not find things you never saw before.
You see something every time you open the book up. Every time. I see things that how did I miss that?
Yeah.
You know, when did that get in?
Right, yes. It's a great way of putting it too, Bob.
Really, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And then there's things you're reading, I don't understand that. Or why does we're reading Ezekiel right now, and there's a lot of double talking.
Yeah.
He's using the words over, the same words over. Why would he do that? And
Great illustration, great point. There's always more there to be discovered, isn't there? All right. Thank you for sharing, because Bob, I'm going to leave that there because you said it better than I could have. Now, 6 through 8 talks about what element of God. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Here, I think, is possibly the greatest problem with seeing the God of the Old Testament as this intolerant tyrant. When the Greeks believed in the pantheon of gods, those gods did all kind of despicable things, right? The Greek mythology is filled with gods doing killing their children, right, to punish all kinds of sensuous, self-serving acts, right? Well, when you serve gods like that, what happened to ancient Greece? What took place in their culture? The same things, right? And how could that not be the case? Here's my point. If we view our God as an intolerant, unloving God, albeit the God of the Old Testament, he's still the God of the New Testament, how are we going to interact with one another? If we think that being right is the most important thing, then is it not very likely that we would elevate that above people? What I'm getting at there is, I saw a quote recently, said, your theology is never an excuse to treat people badly. Haven't you seen that happen? Where theology becomes an excuse to insult and yell, to act poorly towards people. Well, that's how we view God. How could that not be our conclusion, our actions? Right here at the giving of the law, God's getting some principles out. He's talking about mercy, grace, steadfast love. But that's not all. Before we go on that next step, questions or comments? The next step he deals with, in one word, I believe, is justice, right? He says, but don't think that I'm going to be the kind of God that allows my love to motivate me to do bad things. That's possible, right? Where we love our children or, someone so much that we do things we ought not do because of that love. God says, no, it's not going to be me. I'm also a just God. Questions, comments? We'll end with this passage. So next week we'll look at our relationship to God, because that's what the first 4 Ten Commandments are about, right? The relationship to God. Let's end then with Matthew 5, 7 through 20. I'm getting there. Sure, go ahead, Bob.
Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, pure in heart, for they shall...
Wait, 17 through 20?
17, Matthew 17.
No, Matthew 5, verse 17 through 20.
Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth shall pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men, so he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, and so at the end of our reading, we see very clearly, I believe, that Jesus is talking about what I said earlier, the new kingdom. He's talking about the law. So he talks about the law and the prophets, and the things he's teaching are so revolutionary that he feels it necessary to say, don't think that I came to destroy everything you know. Why does he have to say that? Because, as I just mentioned, it's revolutionary. So he says, not one jot, or ESV says iota or dot. Jot or tittle, that's what King James says. We're not familiar with any of those 4 words, right? Or maybe a dot. Iota is the smallest letter in their alphabet. A dot was the smallest part of that letter. He's saying not the smallest letter, not even the smallest part of the smallest letter is going to pass away until all is fulfilled. Jesus is taking the concepts that God talked about. He said, I'm not going to do away with them, I'm going to fulfill them. And then I want to look at verse 20, because this will be a great way to conclude and a good introduction for the sermon today. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no way inherit the kingdom of heaven. That's a scary phrase. And I think it also is a phrase, as much criticism as we see Jesus give of the scribes and Pharisees, we need to also acknowledge his compliments of them.
Right there.
It's a tremendous compliment, isn't it?
And before, he's usually saying how bad they do stuff, you know.
Yes.
Very compliment, and yet to do exactly have their rights just like they have.
Even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me, because I hate to cut Bob short, but we're right there, so I want to wrap this up. These scribes and Pharisees tried to keep every letter of the law. They tried to make more and more laws so that you didn't come close to breaking the laws. There's 2 things. He says you're going to have to exceed their righteousness. I believe these are the 2 things that Jesus is getting at. Number 1, we're going to have his righteousness. Right? Number 2, in a more practical, not theological way, though, What Jesus criticized these scribes and Pharisees for over and over and over and over and over again is the lack of concern, the lack of care for their fellow mankind. They saw God as intolerant dictator, and they acted as intolerant dictators. And Jesus is saying, you're going to have to do better. You're going to have to do much better. Thank you for your time.